Hi. The purpose, is this loud enough?
Yeah.
The purpose of this meeting is to debate the proposed changes to the Gender Recognition Act, and specifically the implications for women and girls politically, legally and socially. Any changes in law to make it easier to self-identify your sex will also apply to children of any age and impact on children of any age. I will talk this evening about children as a distinct group, but given the subject of the event today, I will focus more on girls. I will argue that gender self-identity policies harm all children, but disproportionately harm girls, for the obvious reasons that gender disproportionately harms girls. And the loss of sex-based legal rights and protections, of course, impact more on girls than on boys. The issue of medical transition of children itself also requires a gendered analysis. Almost 70% of the children referred to the Tavistock Gender Clinic are girls. The ratio rises to over 74% in the teenage years. In comparison to these figures, in the late 60s, 90% of adult transsexuals were male. The explanation for the nearly 1,000% increase in referrals to the Tavistock Clinic just over the last 6 years, greater visibility of trans people and role models, does not explain why it is overwhelmingly teenage girls who are inflating these figures. Historically, the small number of children referred to gender clinics was composed primarily of boys, but since children have been taught that being a boy or a girl is a choice based on personal feelings, worldwide it is overwhelmingly girls who are exercising that choice, and they are doing so when they hit puberty. I will come back to that subject. First, I want to point out an anomaly in the calls for the Gender Recognition Act reform. While trans activists call for the demedicalisation of transgender, in the case of children, they campaign aggressively for affirmation, social transition, blockers and cross-sex hormones at ever earlier ages. So I'll start with the issue of medical transition of children and why, in my view, we should not be labelling children transgender. Transgender is an ideological label, it's not a clinical term. It's distinct from the clinical diagnosis of gender dysphoria. To call a child transgender is to make both a claim that the child's feelings represent material reality and an assumption about that child's future. They will not change. An analysis of all published research studies of children with gender dysphoria shows that, in fact, children, of course, do change. In fact, change is the one certainty of childhood. Around 80% of children will naturally come to be happy as the sex they were born, and this is true of even some of the most extreme cases. We can't know which children will persist and which children will desist. Opposite sex identity in childhood is overwhelmingly predictive of gay or lesbian sexual orientation in adulthood and not transgender. There's a huge range of reasons for identifying as the opposite sex in childhood, ranging from normal developmental exploration to difficult family dynamics, previous trauma, all the way to sexual abuse. This is why the established model of treatment for children is called watchful waiting, a developmentally informed approach which explores possible factors underlying a child's belief that they are the opposite sex, and attempts to help a child resolve this disconnect between mind and body. Affirmation of preferred gender is a new approach associated with the full social transition of a child through name change and change of clothes, etc. This approach is informed not by research or evidence, but by social change, change which has been driven by the tactics of transgender activists to shut down debate and silence those in disagreement. The issue of transgender kids has become a political social justice issue, and anything other than affirmation of a child's gender identity has been painted as conversion therapy by health organisations pressured by activists.
Mike's stopped.
Transgender organisations have consistently promoted the message that if a child is prevented from medically transitioning, they are at risk of suicide, and that puberty blockers are a fully reversible and safe way to buy time for a child to decide. There is no evidence that children will commit suicide if their parents fail to support them in taking a medical pathway, but of course the threat terrifies parents into feeling they have to. Affirmation and social transition has been shown to increase rates of persistence of gender dysphoria in children. And yet, this is the model that both therapists and schools are now compelled to use. Affirmation doesn't care why you identify as trans. Affirmation just cares that you do. A child's identity is not fixed. It changes over time and it is shaped by factors like parental approval and societal influences. If all trusted adults are reinforcing daily a little boy's belief that he is really a girl, it is obvious that this will have a self-fulfilling effect. Puberty blockers supply the answer to the created fear of a puberty he now believes to be the wrong one. Blockers have only been used in the UK for children with gender dysphoria under the age of 16 since 2014. Licensed for the use in the treatment of men with prostate cancer, studies have raised concerns about effects on short-term memory, language ability, mental flexibility, and inhibitory control. The effects of blockers on adolescent neurological development are unknown. Recent studies from the US indicate long-term serious health effects for some women who were administered blockers for precocious puberty. And it was overwhelmingly girls that are given puberty blockers for precocious puberty, such as excruciating muscle and bone pain, depression, weakness and fatigue. There are no studies to show that blockers are truly reversible when used to treat gender dysphoria, as so few children come off them once they start that the number is too small to study. Blockers clearly work to prevent children changing their minds. There are increasing concerns that their use may prevent the crisis in adolescence necessary for stable identity formation. Preventing a child's sexual development in early puberty, followed at 16 by cross-sex hormones, results in sterility, as viable eggs or sperm have not developed. These children are prevented from ever experiencing puberty. Hormones can only superficially feminize or masculinize secondary sex characteristics. They cannot create the puberty of the opposite sex. Risks of cross-sex hormones include cardiac disease, high blood pressure, blood clots, strokes, diabetes, and cancers. Although there exists plentiful research on the etiology of transsexualism in adult males, there are no clinical research studies on adults who underwent medical gender reassignment treatments in childhood, as this is a completely new phenomenon. This is an experiment. The recent spike in teenage girls identifying as boys with no previous indication of gender dysphoria is a completely new presentation, which has been termed rapid onset gender dysphoria. The first and only study of this group indicates a high incidence of internet and peer group influence, where a number of teenage girls within a friendship group come out together as transgender. A high percentage of these girls report increased popularity, although parents report worsening mental health and parent-child relationships. Typically, these girls receive online advice, trust only transgender sources for information, retreat into transgender-only friendship groups, and may mock those who are not transgender or LGBT. Parents report that their teenagers' sudden announcement that they are transgender typically follows their immersion in online transgender forums, such as on Reddit, Tumblr, and YouTube. We are aware that teenagers and young adults are susceptible to indoctrination, radicalisation and social contagion, which is why we block online anorexia and self-harm sites. Historic cases of social contagion all involve teenage girls. Their vulnerability to this is recognised. The internet, however, is chock full of Tumblr bloggers and YouTube vloggers with hundreds of thousands of followers who are selling vulnerable young people the myth of transformation through cosmetic alteration of their bodies, including amputation of healthy body parts and a lifetime's dependency on powerful off-label hormones. The medical pathway itself has more serious effects for girls. So-called chest binders carry serious health risks and should be seen as a form of self-harm. In my view, they symbolically prevent girls from breathing. Testosterone has significant effects which are irreversible, such as male pattern baldness and body and facial hair growth and a masculinized voice. And of course, double mastectomy cannot be reversed. Recent reports of girls' mental health in the UK indicate that girls and young women are in crisis. Recently published evidence of the rate of sexual abuse and harassment in schools across the UK is a matter of national shame. Reports such as the recent Stonewall Schools report, which indicate high suicidal ideation in trans youth, serve to cover up the fact that the vast majority of these young people will be teenage girls, now hidden in the category transgender. It is recognised that young people presenting as trans have high rates of comorbidities, such as depression, anxiety, self-harming and eating disorders. The prevalence of young people on the autism spectrum is of great concern. Lynn will talk more about the fact that the majority of these young girls are lesbians. A transgender diagnosis not only prevents us from analysing this phenomenon within a model of adolescent girls' mental health, but denies the young person themselves normal duty of care under the new affirmative care informed consent model. There are over 260 funded trans youth support groups across the UK, which provide the tribe where our most vulnerable young people will be accepted, maybe for the first time, as long as they identify as trans. All transgender organisations advertise their support for gender non-conforming, gender questioning or gender variant youth, sweeping up all children who are different and don't fit in. Young people have been given only one way to conceptualise their feelings of disassociation and pain. All other models of thinking about gender, including the feminist model, are denied to them, including in schools, youth groups, and children's charities and organisations. These organisations claim to support diversity, but of course they do the opposite. A girl who rejects feminine stereotypes is transformed into a boy who conforms to masculine stereotypes. Gender nonconformity itself is erased. Regressive and reactionary sex stereotyping is not only being sold to young people as a progressive social justice movement, but the adults who teach it to young people frame it as a youth movement. The proposed reforms to the Gender Recognition Act to make self-identity of sex a simple process is essentially already happening in schools. We are already seeing the erasure of the word girl by means of so-called gender-neutral policies. The deep-rooted effects of female socialisation are perhaps nowhere clearer than in the obedience of the head teachers of the Girls' Schools Association in dropping the word girl in assemblies. Head teachers of boys' schools are not doing the same. Through such policies, girls learn that girl is a subjective word whose meaning is fluid. It is a word we need to be careful of using lest it cause offence to others. When girls are told that a male classmate is now a girl, their sense of their own reality is shattered. If a biological male is a girl, then it is not female biology which makes you a girl, it is something else. Girls must look to a male classmate to find out the invisible magic quality they need, and the boy is given the power to define what a girl is. We cannot predict the long-term practical or psychological effects on girls taught to deny their own biology without the right to even define themselves correctly as the female sex. If teenage girls must consent to a male classmate using their toilets and changing rooms, they learn that their boundaries may be violated and their consent is unimportant. Girls learn that they are not always allowed to say no. This is grooming of girls from the earliest age to accept the presence of males in their private spaces, to not even recognise their own feelings of discomfort, nor their right to their own boundaries. Lessons on the importance of consent become meaningless. Girls who are coached at school into ignoring their own intuition may go on to put themselves in risky situations with any man who claims to be a woman, out of fear of being seen as transphobic. In the case of public swimming pool changing rooms, a young girl cannot name an adult male with a penis as a man. Voyeurism and indecent exposure cease to exist as crimes if a man claims to be a woman. Normal child protection protocols effectively become unlawful. Policies of easy self-identity are already in place in the world of children and adolescents. They are a betrayal of both the young people who are genuinely suffering gender dysphoria and our young girls who are being conditioned to accept that their female biology and their female bodies are irrelevant compared to the feeling in a boy's head, which is reality. Thank you.